Hillary Clinton expected just another hearing, a routine session filled with familiar questions and predictable outcomes. But everything changed the moment Pam Bondi took the floor. Within minutes, Bondi revealed damning emails, exposed long-buried lies, and peeled back the truth about what actually happened in Benghazi. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Silence fell. Clinton suddenly had nowhere left to hide. What was meant to be just another closed door proceeding quickly transformed into something no one saw coming. Not the press, not the audience, and certainly not Hillary herself. It had all the makings of standard Washington theater, scripted exchanges, political posturing, headlines forgotten before lunch. But this day was different. This was the National Tribunal for Accountability, and across from Clinton sat someone uninterested in playing by the old rules. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Pam Bondi, clad in a sharp magenta suit and surrounded by meticulously organized files, didn't bother with introductions. No smiles, no pleasantries. From a moment she leaned in and met Hillary's gaze, the message was clear. This wasn't politics, it was personal. Viewers across the country tuned in expecting political routine. What they witnessed instead was the spark of a confrontation that would ripple across the nation in real time. Bondi opened with a question so direct it froze the room. You deleted 33,000 emails. What? No build-up, no filter, just that one lethal question slicing through years of headlines and dodged inquiries. Clinton responded with a familiar script. Those emails, she claimed, were personal. Notes on yoga, her daughter's wedding, nothing more. Bondi didn't budge. And out of 33,000 messages, not a single one involved briefings on classified matters. Nothing regarding Libya or foreign policy. Clinton hesitated. That's correct. Then Bondi raised a document into the air. The screen behind her lit up with a confidential memo, one that had been sent months before the Benghazi attack. It was a warning from Ambassador Stevens' team, time-stamped and addressed to Hillary's private server. Now the tension in the chamber was tangible. Senators leaned forward. Journalists fell silent. You received this message, Bondi pressed. And yet, there was no additional security. No extra personnel. And 4 Americans died. Clinton tried to speak, but Bondi didn't stop. You told the American people this was due to a protest over a video. But your own staff emailed you on that same night, describing it as a coordinated assault. Why deceive the public? I based my statements on the intelligence I had. Clinton replied carefully. Bondi cut in. Then why did your daughter get the truth before the country did? Another email appeared on the screen. It was sent to Chelsea Clinton the night of the attack. It was a planned attack, not related to any protest. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The moderator tapped the gavel, but the blow had already landed. This was no longer a hearing. It had become something else, a reckoning, and it was far from over. Bondi turned to the tribunal panel. There's a pattern here, she said, voice steady. Public misdirection, erased communications, dodged responsibility. This isn't negligence. It's deliberate. The weight of her words settled over the room. For years, questions had gone unanswered. Now, for the first time, the dots were connecting clearly, unmistakably. And Pam Bondi was only getting started. What followed in the hours to come would cast shadows over Clinton's legacy, shake public confidence in the justice system, and reignite a national debate over truth, power, and accountability. And the most explosive parts? They hadn't even been revealed yet. As whispers swept across the chamber, Bondi calmly reached for the next file. Thick, tightly tabbed. The label on the front read, Unauthorized Communications, State Deputy. She lifted her eyes. 33,000 emails, she repeated, her voice sharp, controlled. And yet, your legal team claims not one contained classified information. Is that still your position? Clinton folded her hands. That's correct. And who reviewed them? Bondi asked. Who made that call? My attorneys. They went through them. Bondi didn't blink. Your lawyers, none of whom held security clearance, decided which emails to hand over to the State Department and which to permanently delete. Clinton adjusted the microphone. They were instructed to follow protocol. That wasn't the question. A flicker of discomfort crossed Clinton's face. Bondi flipped to a specific page in her folder, tapping a highlighted section. This email, dated June 29, 2012, discusses U.S. troop movements in Libya. It was marked confidential when sent, and it was delivered straight to your private server. Clinton leaned in. I never knowingly received or sent classified material. Bondi didn't miss a beat, but the law doesn't require intent. It uses the term gross negligence. In other words, being careless with national security. A long silence followed. The panel looked down at their copies of the email. Bondi shifted the screen. Side-by-side images showed the redacted and unredacted versions of Clinton's correspondence. Do you know how many of your emails were retroactively classified after being recovered by the FBI? She asked. Clinton's voice flattened. A handful. 110, Bondi replied. And that's only the beginning. A slideshow began to play. Email after email appeared. Benghazi briefings. Foreign contact updates. Confidential intelligence discussions. All linked directly to Clinton's private server. Then came the next revelation. If you're enjoying this so far, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to see this. These weren't just mishandled messages, Bondi said. They represented an intentional effort to avoid government oversight. The server wasn't even in a secure federal facility. It was stored in your basement. Gasps. Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words cut deeper that way. Madam Secretary, do you understand that what you did didn't just violate internal rules? It left a blind spot in national security. Clinton pushed back. With respect, the FBI found no evidence of intent. Bondi responded swiftly. They didn't have all the evidence, because some of it was deleted, wiped with bleach bit, devices destroyed, SIM cards removed. If these are just yoga notes, why go to such lengths? Silence. The question lingered like smoke. The moderator cleared his throat but stayed quiet. Cameras zoomed in on Bondi's unwavering expression. Millions were watching, some stunned, others nodding, thinking finally. But this wasn't just about emails anymore. The real story, the reason Clinton's team looked shaken, was still coming. Pam Bondi had only peeled back the first layer. She opened an X file, this one thinner but heavier in meaning. The cover read, Benghazi, September 11th, 2012. She didn't begin with a question. She began with a timeline. 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, she said. That's when the first distress call came in. The U.S. consulate in Benghazi was under attack. Ambassador Stevens was inside. The screen behind her lit up again, this time showing real-time communications, logs, alerts, frantic messages from the compound. By 8:45, a second wave breached the walls. By 10 p.m., it was chaos. Americans were under siege, pleading for help. She paused. Madam Secretary, do you remember where you were that night? I was at the State Department, monitoring the situation, Clinton answered. Bondi nodded. And when Ambassador Stevens sent his final message, what did he say? Clinton paused, chose her words. He reported they were taking heavy fire, that they were pinned down. Bondi held up the message. He said, we're under attack. If backup doesn't come soon, we won't survive. She let that sink in. And yet, Bondi said, no rescue mission was launched. No reinforcements sent. 4 Americans died, including Ambassador Stevens. Then came the final blow. Yet within hours, your office told the American people it was a protest over a YouTube video. Clinton maintained a steady tone. That was the intelligence consensus at the time. Bondi shook her head. That's simply not true. Internal communications show that just hours after the attack, you and your team knew it was a coordinated act of terrorism. Yet, you told the American people a completely different story. The room went silent as a screenshot appeared on the screen behind her. An email from Clinton to the Egyptian foreign minister. Bondi read it aloud. We know the attack had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned operation by an Al-Qaeda-like group. Dated September 12th, the morning after. Another wave of gasps rolled through the chamber. You gave one version to the public, Bondi said, her voice unwavering, and a completely different one to your foreign allies. What? Clinton's reply came with forced calm. though a trace of frustration showed through. The situation was still developing. Reports were conflicting. We didn't want to provoke unrest or cause panic. Bondi leaned forward. No, you didn't want to damage your public image in the middle of an election. A thick silence followed, the kind that makes people shift in their chairs. But no one moved. That video narrative? Bondi continued. It was repeated again and again. Susan Rice went on 5 Sunday shows and pushed it. You stood by it. And all the while, you knew it wasn't true. Clinton's eyes narrowed. We did the best we could with the information we had. There was no intent to mislead. Bondi didn't flinch. Then why did you tell your daughter the truth that same night? And something completely different to the families of the victims? Another email appeared on screen. This one addressed to Chelsea Clinton. 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-type group. Bondi turned back to Clinton. The contrast couldn't be clearer. You told grieving parents it was a protest, while telling your daughter it was terrorism. Her voice softened, but the words hit harder. They stood beside their son's flag-draped caskets, and you looked them in the eye and lied. The air thickened. Not even the panel members stirred. Clinton opened her mouth, but no words came. Bondi let the silence expand before calmly closing the file in front of her. This isn't political, she said quietly. This is about accountability. 4 Americans are dead. For years, we've been given half-truths and spin. That ends today. But Bondi wasn't finished. Because buried underneath the Benghazi tragedy was something even deeper, a network of money, access, and global influence, all masked beneath the banner of philanthropy. She returned to the table, placing a sleek black binder in front of her. The label, Foundation Contributions, Confidential Associations. Her tone slowed. Purposeful. Let's talk about the Clinton Foundation. Clinton straightened slightly. This was an unfamiliar ground. She'd answered questions on this before, but Bondi wasn't interested in repeating history. She was here to draw a map no one had dared draw before. During and after your time as Secretary of State, Bondi began, the foundation received millions in foreign donations. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Algeria. These weren't individuals. These were regimes, some with troubling human rights records. Clinton replied evenly. All donations were disclosed publicly and cleared by the appropriate ethics teams. Bondi raised a brow. Were they? She pressed a button on her remote. 2 timelines appeared on the screen behind her, one showing foreign donations, the other key policy decisions from the State Department. Let's examine the sequence, she said. In June 2010, the Algerian government made a $500,000 donation. Coincidentally, they were actively lobbying your department for sanctions relief. 3 weeks later, that exemption was granted. Clinton shifted. I had no direct role in that review. Bondi continued. February 2012, Qatar pledges over $1 million. 2 months later, they receive approval for a major arms deal from your department. She turned to the panel. Now, I'm not saying this is a proven quid pro quo, but if this pattern involved anyone else, any CEO, any senator, it would trigger a federal investigation. Even Clinton's legal team was visibly attentive now. Bondi didn't stop. And what about Uranium One? She asked. Russia's nuclear agency acquires 20% of America's uranium output. And around the same time, the company's chairman donates $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation. Clinton's tone sharpened. I didn't approve that deal. It went through a committee. Bondi nodded. But that committee doesn't act without the Secretary of State's go-ahead. You were the gatekeeper. She held up another document. Over $145 million in foreign donations, either during your term or shortly after. And emails referencing these donor meetings weren't sent through official government servers. They were sent through your private system. Bondi paused. Do you see a pattern here, Madam Secretary? Clinton didn't answer. Her expression hardened. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen behind Bondi. This isn't about sloppy judgment, Bondi said. It's about transparency. It's about the American people's right to know who is shaping their foreign policy and whether our national interests were traded for foreign dollars. She took a breath. You called your foundation a force for good, but to many Americans, it looks like a vehicle for influence. a revolving door between foreign money and U.S. diplomacy. She shut the binder gently. We're not here to relive your political career. We're here to ask one thing. Was there a line? And did you cross it? Silence fell again, but Bondi still wasn't done. From beneath her notes, she drew a single envelope, far thinner than the rest. No tabs, no labels, just a plain manila folder, handwritten across the front. Whistleblower. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she met Clinton's eyes. This file didn't come from a subpoena or a leak. It was delivered directly to our office by someone who worked under you, someone who watched it unfold and finally couldn't stay silent. The air shifted. Clinton's jaw tensed. This individual served in your communications team between 2011 and 2013. They were present for discussions about both the private server and your office's post-Benghazi messaging. Bondi slid the envelope closer. Inside is a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury. It describes conversations where you were directly warned about the risks of using a private server for government business. She paused, and it says your staff discussed ways to distance that server from oversight, including softening its presence in records in case questions ever came. Clinton jumped in sharply. Anyone can make claims. A letter like that doesn't make them true. Bondi didn't even glance at her. It's signed and notarized. She opened the envelope and lifted out a single sheet bearing the tribunal's official seal. Bondi read aloud. I was present during multiple internal discussions where Secretary Clinton voiced concerns about FOIA exposure and congressional review. She stated the need for a separate communication channel, one not subject to retrieval. Murmurs filled the chamber. Bondi continued. After the Benghazi incident, I heard the chief of staff say, "We need to control the narrative now. We'll go with the video story until we can clean this up." Clinton's gaze locked on Bondi. That's a lie. Bondi kept her voice steady. Then explain why your team told two stories, one to the press and another to foreign leaders. Why were your statements so calculated, if not as part of a strategy? Clinton stayed silent. Bondi held up the affidavit. This whistleblower also submitted metadata, showing that internal memos were altered after the fact. Phrases like terrorist attack were swapped out for protest before release to the media. Panel members leaned in. Some whispered. Notes are being taken. This no longer felt like political theater. It felt like the start of something more. The American people were fed a polished script, Bondi said, while the truth was buried under redactions and talking points. Clinton broke her silence. This person is anonymous. I won't respond to allegations without knowing who's behind them. They'll testify, Bondi replied. But first, this tribunal will review the server logs and GPS timestamps that support their claims. And just like that, the weight of the moment shifted again. Because what came next was no longer just accusation. It was evidence. She held the affidavit lightly, letting the silence linger. It's not just about the mistakes, Bondi said, her voice low. It's about how far you went to make sure no one ever found out. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery like a quiet current. But the heart of the scandal, the piece that could finally answer the one question everyone had asked for years, had yet to be revealed. Bondi had kept the most explosive piece for the end, because it wasn't just about emails or donations. It was about a name, a person, someone who connected everything. She let the stillness settle before picking up a new folder. Unlike the rest, this one had a name printed across the top. One few Americans had heard before, but none would forget afterward. Abdul Rahman Al-Fed, she said. Clinton's face stayed composed, but her fingers moved slightly, a tiny twitch that didn't go unnoticed. Al-Fed is a Libyan businessman, Bondi continued. Not a diplomat, not a government figure. Yet in 2011 and 2012, he had several off-the-record meetings with senior staff from your State Department. No official entries, no transparency. With a click, the screen behind her lit up, satellite pings, visit timestamps, logs sourced from foreign embassies. In the weeks after each meeting, she said, funds were transferred from his holding companies to organizations now flagged by the FBI for money laundering. She paused. One of those organizations donated to the Clinton Foundation. Now pins moved. Heads tilted, the panel leaned forward. And do you know what he told his associates in early 2012? Bondi asked that things would move quickly if he stayed supportive. We have the intercepted transcript. His words, she gave her word in Geneva. It's happening. Clinton crossed her arms. I don't know this man. I've never spoken to him. Maybe not directly, Bondi replied. But your top aide met with him. 3 separate times. Geneva, Tripoli, and at a private residence in Manhattan. The screen changed again. A grainy image appeared. Clinton's aide stepping out of a black SUV, followed by Al-Fed. The timestamp read December 2012. This isn't theory, Bondi said. It's verified. Financial transfers, travel manifests, surveillance footage. She looked Clinton in the eye. And what did Al-Fed want? Influence. He wanted a backdoor to U.S. policy on Libya after Gaddafi. He wanted access to American-funded rebuilding projects. And within 6 months, his companies got those contracts. One of the tribunal members finally spoke. Are you implying she signed off on those deals in return for donations? I'm saying the pattern is undeniable, Bondi replied. A foreign donor meets with a high-level aide. Shortly after, their companies receive favorable treatment. Meanwhile, donations are routed to a foundation run by the secretary's family. She stepped back. That's not a theory. That's a paper trail. Clinton responded slowly. There's no proof I authorized any of that. The State Department follows multi-layered processes. Except when those layers are bypassed, Bondi shot back. Except when meetings aren't logged. Except when communication happens through private email servers. She tapped the folder again. This isn't about a mistake. It's about a structure, a system designed to avoid scrutiny and reward those who pay the entry fee. The phrase landed. Pay to play. Bondi faced the cameras now. Americans deserve to know if their government can be bought, if diplomacy is up for sale. And what does that mean for the rule of law? The room didn't move. No rebuttals. Just silence thick with realization. But even with the story of Al-Fed laid bare, Bondi knew she wasn't done. One final chapter remained. One that didn't just touch Clinton's record, but an entire presidency. She moved on with deliberate calm. We've covered Benghazi, the foundation, and the emails, she said. But now it's time to talk about something that impacted more than your legacy. It shook the nation. She pressed the remote. A new title filled the screen, The Steele Dossier. Clinton didn't flinch, but her foot tapped once against the floor. The Steele Dossier, Bondi said, a report that fueled investigations, fractured the country, and dominated the headlines. It was compiled by a former British intelligence officer, hired, in part, by your campaign and the DNC. Clinton clasped her hands. That's not new. It was disclosed. Opposition research is common. It's not the payment, Bondi said. It's what was done with it. She turned to the panel. This document wasn't just released to reporters. It was given to federal agencies. Sold as intelligence. It became the basis for surveillance, for FISA warrants, for spying on American citizens. A memo flashed on screen. An admission from a former FBI agent. Parts of the dossier were unverified. Some are false. Yet it was still used to justify extraordinary investigations. Did you know, Bondi asked, that your campaign's contractors met with DOJ officials while compiling this document? Clinton didn't respond. Did you know the same firm pushing the dossier also coordinated press leaks to make its claims seem credible? Again, nothing. This wasn't vetting, Bondi continued. It was narrative building, a strategy to cast suspicion on arrival. And when you were asked about your involvement, you claimed ignorance. She held up a transcript. October 2017. When asked if you funded the dossier, you said, I didn't know until after it was published. But campaign records prove your team approved payments to Fusion GPS months before the public ever heard of it. She let the implication linger. Americans were told this was intelligence. It wasn't. It was a political weapon. Another panel member leaned forward. Are you saying this dossier was fabricated to mislead investigators? I'm saying it was never verified, never authenticated. It was used to turn federal institutions into tools of partisanship. She looked back at Clinton. You claimed truth mattered. That transparency was essential. But when it came to your foundation, your server, and this dossier, you chose secrecy. Clinton's voice finally broke through. You've turned this into a circus, a campaign speech masquerading as a hearing. Bondi didn't blink. No, Madam Secretary, I'm showing how those in power escape consequences, and how you've mastered that game better than anyone. The chamber fell quiet again, but Bondi wasn't done, because her closing remarks wouldn't just be about scandals. They would be about what comes next, and what this all meant for the people watching. The lights above flickered faintly as the hearing moved into its third hour. But Bondi stood firm, both hands resting on the desk. Let's zoom out, she said. This isn't about one person. It's about a system that shields the powerful while holding everyone else to account. She turned to the panel, then to the public. If any other federal employee had created a private email network to hide official records, if they deleted 33,000 emails under subpoena, if they'd lied to grieving families, accepted foreign donations while shaping policy, or disguised opposition research as intelligence. She paused. They'd face charges. At the very least, they'd be held responsible. The panel didn't speak. But when your name is Hillary Clinton, Bondi said the rules bend. They fade. Eventually, they disappear. Clinton's expression remained unchanged, but the atmosphere shifted. Everyone in the room could feel it. Pam Bondi opened a file titled Prosecution Outcomes, Non-Elites. In 2016, she began, a Navy sailor was sentenced to prison for taking 6 photographs inside a classified area of a submarine. He didn't leak them. He didn't sell them. He simply kept them and lost his freedom. She turned a page. Another case, Reality Winner, a federal contractor, received over 5 years in prison for leaking one classified document. A single page. She flipped to the next. Time and time again, Americans have lost careers, clearances, and liberty for doing a fraction of what we've laid out here today. She lifted the folder. These people didn't have media cover. They didn't have the weight of political machinery behind them. They weren't running for president. They were just citizens. Clinton shifted in her seat, sitting taller. I've complied with every investigation, she said. I sat through 11 hours of congressional testimony. Multiple agencies cleared me. Bondi nodded. Clear by systems you had deep ties to. Clear by processes that never had full access, because the truth was deleted, withheld, or buried. She stepped forward, hands now free of papers. The anger in this country isn't about mistakes. It's about the absence of consequences. She turned to face the rows of observers, veterans, Gold Star families, civil servants. They've lived under scrutiny. Every form, every rule, every regulation followed to the letter. And they watched as you bent those rules to suit your own ends. Facing the tribunal once more, she continued. This hearing isn't about revisiting the past. It's about restoring trust, about proving that power does not erase responsibility, that holding office doesn't place you above the law. Clinton responded with cool resolve. Every decision I made was based on the intelligence I had. I acted under extreme pressure and did what I believed was right. Bondi returned to her seat. You had a responsibility, not to politics, not to narrative, but to the truth. Not to obscure it, reframe it, or reroute it through back channels and international donations. Just the truth. The tribunal's moderator leaned forward. And what would you recommend, Ms. Bondi? Pam looked up calmly. I don't offer recommendations. The evidence speaks for itself. She tapped the files, emails, sworn statements, donor records, surveillance logs. The question isn't what I believe. It's whether this panel, this government, still believes in a single, equal standard of justice. A quiet rustle passed through the gallery. It wasn't outrage anymore. It was reflection. Bondi had laid out the facts. All that remained now was the final point. Not to accuse, but to remind everyone what is lost when truth is traded for power. She sat still for a beat, letting the silence hold. Then she rose, holding up a single page. This, she said, is not an email, not a donor transaction, not a classified file. It's a list of names. She placed it on the desk and began to read. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty, Each name rang out like a tolling bell. These men weren't political pawns. They weren't headlines. They were Americans who answered a call and died waiting for help that never came. She turned to face Clinton. They sent warnings, requested more security, flagged growing threats. Each time, they were told resources weren't available. Bondi walked slowly to the platform's edge. And when the shooting began, when flames overtook the compound, when pleas for help were made, you didn't send reinforcements. You sent a press release blaming a protest. Clinton sat unmoving. You went to bed that night. They didn't. Bondi's voice dropped, and days later, you stood before their families. You looked them in the eyes and told them something you already knew wasn't true. Someone in the gallery quietly wiped away a tear. Another clenched their hands. Bondi faced the tribunal. If we don't ask these questions now, then when? If the most powerful can delete records, ignore subpoenas, and walk away untouched, what are we telling the rest of America? That justice is optional. Silence. She stepped back to her desk, exhaled, then turned to Clinton one final time. I'm not asking you to revise history. I'm asking you to confront it. Clinton's voice was quieter now. Yes, I still believe I made the right calls. Bondi's gaze didn't waver. Then, softly, so did they. She gestured toward the names once more. A click echoed through the room as she powered off the screen. The tribunal was nearly over, but the silence that followed held more weight than any headline ever could. For the first time, all the unanswered questions had been placed squarely on the record, calmly, meticulously, and without evasion. The moderator turned to her. Ms. Bondi, any final words? She stood for the last time. Her voice was even, her message unwavering. This hearing wasn't about payback. It wasn't about partisanship. It was about accountability. She looked out, not just at the panel, but to the crowd of families, veterans, reporters, and ordinary Americans. You came today hoping for something you haven't gotten in years. The truth. Not spun, not sanitized. The real thing. For too long, she said, power has meant protection. A personal server meant no records. A global foundation meant no paper trail. A well-rehearsed statement meant no blame. She held up a binder and locked it shut. But that ends here. Because the evidence was never the enemy. The enemy was silence. She turned to Clinton. You once asked, what difference does it make now? Bondi held up a printed transcript of that moment. To the families of the fallen, it makes all the difference in the world. To every American who's been told the rules only apply to some, it makes all the difference in the world. The room was utterly still. This wasn't about what the media chose to show, she said, but what they chose to ignore. About truths hidden beneath headlines. About decisions dressed up as errors. Bondi looked directly at the cameras. The American people remember. And what they saw today, they won't forget. She gathered the files, placed them into a final binder, and clicked it closed. We're told justice is blind, she said. But justice also demands courage. The courage to face power and ask, what did you do? And why did you hide it? The moderator nodded. Thank you, Ms. Bondi. This tribunal will now deliberate. Pam gave a small nod and returned to her seat. The panel rose. The audience stood, not in applause, not in anger, but in quiet acknowledgement that something rare had taken place. A reckoning. Clinton exited silently through the rear corridor. Outside, cameras flashed and headlines erupted in real time. But inside that room, the story had already been told. One not shaped by spin, but by facts no one could dodge anymore. Pam Bondi closed her binder, nodded to the families seated behind her, and walked out, never looking back. Because for her, this was never about headlines. It was always about the truth. And finally, the truth had spoken. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps this going.